morning, my friends. First thing is I need to apologize for the sound of the generator running behind me. That may cause some audio difficulties. It is actually not quite 80 degrees outside, but the humidity is extremely oppressive. Very hard to breathe when I woke up this morning. This is this video is part of, or I wouldn't say part of, but my response to both Rob Gusterson and John Ferrara's conversation and discussions on the topic of magic and magic users in general. Both of them have done a good job, an excellent job of discussing the topic, bringing up the topic. There are, of course, a few points I'd like to throw onto the table, so to speak. And of course, typical of the fat man, I've got another. I won't say that let's just say it's another one of those many often disregarded or played down set of rules. You betcha I got that. But when we talk about plethora of magic, now I'm not going to say I'm a hypocrite, because I'm not. I have played the gamut, everything from the Monty Hall to the stingiest of stingy when it comes to doling out magic or allowing access to magic to my players over the decades. And I think most of us have experimented with this a time or two. Some game systems are more conducive to it than others. It's a kind of a given that the players expect to be able to get access to various enhanced or improved bits and pieces of equipment to both protect their characters or to further deal out damage and or to circumvent issues with the environment, things like encumbrance, substance, travel, right, and the weather. So that's part and partial of the fantasy setting. That's going along those lines. I think I've had that conversation with Rob, and I've had this conversation with numerous people over the years about the concept of having too much magic versus too little. One of the things I point out is that, and Rob brought it up, real good job of bringing it up, is how commonplace most magic seems to be in many fantasy RPGs. And I don't care if it's D&D or Pathfinder or Conan D20 or whatever's your, flame, the Flame Princess of the Bituin Caves or whatever it is that's the current flavor. The fact of the matter is, there's still a lot of it out there. And short of having some sort of magic factory just cranking this stuff out in droves, because it seems like everybody should have it, keeping in mind, and I remind myself this was just last night watching those videos, that the players are the exception to the rule. They are the heroes, along with the fat cat here who's marking my phone. They are the heroes of their story, and of course they should have access to hero and heroine based stuff. I mean, it's a given. I'm a big fan of having the magic shops in my campaign worlds because of just simplicity. You can go in and you can purchase very basic low-end magic items fairly easily. Anything above +2, we start rolling randomly to see X amount of items and what they are. Like Rob, you'll never find a high-level magic item or an artifact available openly in any shop or through any trader or merchant or what have you in one of my worlds. These are items that are meant to be rare for a reason. Generally speaking, an artifact is the only version of it and should be part of a quest and or a very in-depth adventure to acquire. Now, of course, this all implies that your gaming campaign is not going to be a short-lived campaign or a one-off. unless you're one of these GMs who have their players do multiple campaigns in different settings, but using the same ever-growing set of characters. That's one of those challenges of developing character development, is how lengthy is a campaign. And we're not going to get into a sidetrack on that because that's a set of topics unto itself. And I'd be quite interested to hear you guys' take on that subject in different videos, of course. Now, we know that there, like Rob says, that in Greyhawk there are academies or guilds, and in Faerun, in Forgotten Realms, there are not so much academies, but they do have guilds or memberships thereof, but they also have a lot more of the high mage X amount of apprentices kind of set up. In either case, a lot of your low level items would be those potentially the graduating thesis or something for a would-be wizard or mage. So if you want to show that you have reach a certain plateau of ability and really can start acting out from under the wings of your mentor and your teacher, you would develop some of these lower end magic items, mostly for an example that you're capable of doing that. And these items will then be either utilized by your character or potentially doled out to associates and friends, as Rob puts out. Some other potential means or excuses, if you will, justifications of why there's a plethora of magic in a given campaign world. Most worlds are old or even ancient. Many of them have deep backstory histories. See what I got to think of. Most magic items can last indefinitely if not damaged or destroyed. It's implied that once something's imbued with a magic, unless something removes that magic or somehow consumes it, this item is pretty much capable of existing for quite a long time, indefinitely. So if you've got a world who is layered on top of layered of many ancient civilizations that rose and fell and so on and so forth, the idea that there are literally tens of thousands of magical, mundane or common magic items, low-end stuff, floating around out there isn't unrealistic. It just means that they're really old and can be portrayed that way in the way they look. That's just an option, right? And then we have the take on the 3.0, 3.5 rules. Now I've been doing some reading and stuff on some of these subjects. I was going through my second edition player handbook here. This one was produced in 1989, so there's some interesting stuff in here, and it goes on with another video that I want to do, and there's some stuff in the front of the player or the GM guide that I want to read, but I'm not sure I want to bug you guys with this particular video. But I thought sometimes it's interesting to remind ourselves of where we've been and some of the stuff what other people thought, and then meanwhile, for those who have never been in these things, show them some new stuff that's not old stuff, that's actually new. The problem with the 3.0, 3.5 versions was that they radically designed, enhanced, or really went out of their way to develop this system for creating magic in the first place. And Rob's correct. In the second edition, it's just beginning to get touched on. In first edition, it's also mentioned, but for the lion's share, it says it's a wink and a nod going, go talk to the GM, because we don't know what to do about that sort of stuff at that point. But this is part of the development stage of the games. At some point, they came along and some of these people had developed some solid systems for creating magic items. And of course, I too found the sheer cost of using personal experience points to manufacture magic items as a detriment, and a lot of players just didn't want to sacrifice their character development. I mean, it makes sense. At the same time, I agree with Rob when he says that it's it shows that they're putting a piece of themselves into the creation of this stuff, which, and I think in part was the unintended side effect of this was to rein in some of that Monte Hall overabundance of magic that had become the norm for D&D and AD&D up until this point. At this point, the GMs and players, the veteran players who really study and read this stuff, begun to understand just how much monetary and personal cost the creation of magical items can be. So this was to make them more precious and more valuable. But we're back to that, over time, the world could contain quite a bit of this stuff, even if a wizard is only going to make one magic item in their lifetime. Of course, the disagreement or argument might be is why would they bother making a couple low-level items, a ring of protection, or this or that or the other thing, when there's no real true value. They gain a little protection for themselves, but as wizards of that caliber, they can do far better with their magic than, other than for the love of a companion or the friendship of a companion or something. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay, so the possibility there is that one take we took when that first came out was perhaps, and there are magic and there are items that allow this to occur, but you can trap a person's soul, you can leech a person's life force, you can tap into other people for those experience points, which may or may not have some cause and effect there, or some consequences based off of the caster's alignment choices and or how they're perceived by other people. But that was one possible way of circumventing this, or finding an original way of getting around it. The third possibility is the gods. The gods can create magic, can create items, and they don't have to worry about the expenditure of experience points. So perhaps at some point or another that they've created this item and that item for these chosen champions or warriors, or as lures to lure others in, and so on and so forth. And over time they accumulate. So there's yet a third method. The fourth would be the other magical, powerful entities in a given campaign world. There's a reason why it's a fantasy setting in the first place. There are a lot of other planar creatures, demons, angels, so forth, that are quite powerful. Then there are dragons, and there are other magical, super intelligent or intelligent creatures that have the capability of manufacturing magical items. Now, why would a dragon create a bunch of +1 swords? Well, if he's creating an army, or she's creating she wants to make sure the flunkies she has guarding her lair are better equipped, there's reasons for doing so. Or 100 other possible scenarios. And then, of course, the fifth possible option is the goodly races, specifically the elves. It's established that the elves are extremely long-lived, very long-lived. So it's not unreasonable for an elvish wizard to manufacture dozens of magical items or more in their lifetime, or in their expanse of their so-called immortality, depending on what game campaign or game system you choose to use. But in this case, the fact that this kind of justifies in some aspects why some of these older elves might go back out into the field and continue to adventure. They're going out there to recapture lost experience. I'm just saying, it's a possibility, right? And then, of course, the final possible option, this one here is something right up Rob's alley there, Rob. Low-level items could be created with an alchemical or elemental or other magic. These are items that don't require wizardly magic, don't require the wizard's experience points going off of the 3.0, 3.5 system, and potentially are more because of the material used. So we know that if looking at 3.5's stuff in the book, it says that any magic weapon, for example, or armor, begins with and I know what it is. The above average material weapon. So you need to have a masterwork item to begin with. You can't just take a mundane first run-of-the-mill weaponsmith's attempt at low-level metallurgy or ironmongery and turn it into a highly powerful magic weapon. You need to start with a masterwork weapon. So I'm always was of the opinion that truly +1 weapons and +1 armor weren't magical at all. They were magical in the eyes of the people who didn't understand just how masterly they were manufactured. The fact that these weapons are extremely sharp, use an advanced set of material for their manufacture, gives them advantages. Now, if you look at masterwork by itself, it just makes it harder to break and harder to destroy. But there's no attack modifiers or defense modifiers. But why couldn't there be that justification? So in truth, magic +1, there could be a massive amount of +1 weapons and armor out there, and none of it's truly magical. And the argument is, well, it needs to be magical to attack magical creatures. Well, it's magical in the aspect that it can attack a magical creature because it's a masterwork item. I'm not making that I'm just putting that option out there. Or they've used an alchemical process or alchemical agent in the manufacturing process. So now we have this manufactured magic, or this placement magic, or perhaps they've used nature, some kind of natural element in the manufacture of the item. At this point, we are now using a nature's magic per se, and it still justifies that low-level magic in the eyes of certain types of things, because the lion's share of magic items at the lower end of scale are weapons and armor. I'm just putting that out. Weapons and armor are the bulk of the low-level magic that you encounter. And then there's a lot of miscellaneous stuff that's been tossed in. But in the sheer game of numbers, it's going to be the weapons and armor, hands down. And there you have it on those 6 possible ways to justify having that in your campaign world. Now, as to talking about campaign worlds in general with magic, I have had some campaigns where magic was commonplace, where probably every third person was capable of some low level of magic. Now, whether it be shamans or witches or mages or wild mages or sorcerers or anything in between, the truly powerful individuals, just like in any normal fantasy campaign setting, have worked to really improve and learn and expand their knowledge and their abilities, where the majority of the people have capped out at first or second level, and the world itself is, instead of having an industrial world, it's a magically driven world. So it's not uncommon to walk into a tavern and have glow crystals or glow lamps that are magically powered, as opposed to the terribly inefficient oil-based items for keeping or just wood or tallow to keep the place lit. And you could have lots of low-level magic with cantrips and stuff available to help do your a la Harry Potter kind of stuff. And this was before Harry Potter came out, so it wasn't something I tapped into, although I might have got the idea from some book I read. We get a lot of ideas from books. So that turned out to be fairly interesting and entertaining, and it wasn't overly damaging to the campaign. It didn't change everything to the extreme. I've had campaigns where I ran what I considered sword and sorcery style, as opposed to hack and slash style. The sword and sorcery ones, in my opinion, are the older, more primitive fantasy settings. The original Conan the Barbarian, in my mind, was that kind of setting, where magic is truly, in many cases, a frowned upon practice, and these magic users had to keep to the fringes or had to become very powerful enough that everybody didn't want to mess with them. And the big cities were few and far in between, and mostly they're going to find tiny little thorps and villages, and a lot of your territory and terrain is very primitive in the way that's been taken care of. The farming communities are not very elaborate. A lot of it is subsistence farming and so on and so forth. You don't see a lot of heavily armored knights running around because they don't exist. The few that do exist would be bodyguards or temple champions or things like this, and they stay close to their seats of power. They don't go out unless they're out on a quest. But for the most part, it's a very primitive and dark time in the world. So having magic be rare or very sparse isn't unreasonable. So the whole point of one quest might be the acquisition of a magic item, a sword or a shield or what have you, all of the old stories and mythology and things like that. And it's well received by the right kind of players. A lot of times the more inexperienced players are expecting a video game kind of style of play, and they get either fall in line and become to the point where they enjoy the style of the old school system mindset, and that's probably what we should call it, is a mindset. It's not a set of rules or mechanics or what have you. I challenge that. It's not about story-driven narrative with less emphasis on the mechanic and dice rolls. It's more about the mindset behind it. And like I said, I am struggling with the idea that there are games and lots of game systems that are totally story-driven. I'm sorry, but every RPG is story-driven. It is. How much you choose to use, that's the cat again, how much you choose to use in your campaign and how you approach it as a story perspective is the individuality of the game master and the players. It has nothing to do with the mechanics or the non-mechanics of the game system. And I'm beginning to become more and more hard-headed about that idea. Sorry if that upsets some of you. It's my opinion. I'm entitled to it. You don't like it, put your own opinion out here. Tell me I'm wrong. And you still won't be wrong, because I am the fat man and you're not. You know what I mean. So, we know that the possibility, lots of reasons for having abundance of magic or a dearth of magic. And there's challenges in both sides. And some can be quite interesting and turn out that way. Okay. This is going to lead me to the part where I kind of wanted to do another video, and I think they can fit it into this. Among the most commonly discarded rules in most game systems that are pushed to the side at the very beginning is the fact that we don't worry or chase down or keep track of the components, the magic components. It's a suggestion or given that the particular wizard or mage or what have you is going out of their way to acquire this stuff, unless it's a very rare item, like Rob points out, the Tears of a Drow. And I can think of a number of ways of getting tears out of a drow, and some of them might not be considered PC, but you know, pain can induce tears just as much as emotions. Just pointing that out, depending on your character types. Then there's, the fact is, from the very early days, the idea of a wizard was they're supposed to do some kind of incantation, movement of the hands, or a verbal component, and or utilize some kind of item that they're going to break, they're going to snap, they're going to burn, they're going to eat, they're going to consume, they're going to stick it in something, whatever. The component. Well, it's a pain in the butt to keep track of that stuff and how much usage you've used and how many you have left. But the whole point of it was, at the beginning, in my opinion, was that magic inherently makes that character a very powerful character over time. Eventually that character will become so powerful that most of the other character classes don't stand a chance against them unless they can get the drop on them. This was one way of keeping that check and balance in play. So the wizard can do a death cloud, but requires Tears of a Drow to do it. You're going to have a very limited supply of them, so they're going to be very judicious about when they use that particular spell, because if they only got 5 uses left, and it could be who knows how long before they get their hands on another drow or another vial that triggers the drow, as an example. It behooves that wizard to be very cautious and not to just throw magic around, right, willy-nilly. It's the same reason why the magic has a cost. And a lot of game campaigns use a version of mana or power points. You have a limited amount of abilities. In D&D, it's a spell slot. You have a limited amount of spells per day, and you can tap into these spells. And you have to, in a lot of cases, you got to be prepared for. But so having a wizard who's been prepared for dealing with city environment and political intrigue, suddenly finding themselves on the run and in the need of defensive magic, might find that wizard in a deep set of doo-doo for that first day. Because if you're loaded up with clairvoyance and scrying spells, and suddenly somebody's trying to assassinate you, and you've only got a handful of offensive and defensive spells available, this is why the wizard's carrying a plethora of magic items and create them. It's another justification of expending that experience points in some cases to make sure that they have enough in their arsenal to defend themselves or to go on the offensive if they can't tap into their magic spell repertoire at the moment. It's just something that I've caught a few players flat-footed on over the years as a GM. So the fact that components are kind of a commonly disregarded concept or rule. The later versions started selling, I don't know if it was 4.0, maybe 3.5, but they sold a pouch or a satchel full of components so your wizard could just go into town. When you're in town, they'd buy a new satchel. They're willing to spend a monetary amount every so many game sessions to keep their components refilled, the basic ones anyway. Others would be always on the lookout. Oh, there's some cobwebs. I'm going to gather some cobwebs, and then I use a gummy tree gum substance to bind it so it doesn't dissipate, and blah blah blah. And hey, that's all part and parcel of being involved in gaming and playing the character, right? So, like I said, one of the most among the top 10 maybe most commonly disregarded sets of rules is the components. Now, like I said, I was going through some of my older versions talking about components in general, and they're very vague. They don't spend very much time at all talking about the subject on components. It just gives you an option to utilize them or not. And that being said, I guess I'll go ahead and I'll read the excerpt from this second edition 1989 version or 87 version of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Anybody familiar with that one? Yeah, that is not the orange binding. This is an official second edition, not first edition, second take of first edition. So it says, and blah 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 blah. The Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide give you what you're expected to know, but that doesn't mean the game begins and ends there. Your game will go into directions you've not yet explored, and your players will try things that others think strange. Sometimes these strange things will work, sometimes they won't. Just accept this and be ready for it and enjoy it. Take the time to have fun with the AD&D rules. Add, create, expand, exploit. Don't just let the game sit there. And don't become a rules lawyer worrying about each piddly little detail. If you can't figure out an answer, make it up. And whatever you do, don't fall into the trap of believing that these rules are complete. They are not. You cannot sit back and let the rule book do everything for you. Take the time and effort to become not just a good GM, but a brilliant DM. I'm just saying, right? And it says at conventions and letters, no other phone, I'm often asked for the instant answer to the fine point of the game rules. More often than not, I come back with a question, what do you feel is right? And the people asking the questions discover that not only can they create an answer, but their answer is as good as anyone else's. The rules are only guidelines, right? And I don't care what game system you play, that holds true. At the very beginning of the first Dungeon Master Guide, Gary Gygax stressed that each of us working from a common base would make the AD&D game grow in a variety of different directions. That is more true today than ever. Don't be afraid of experimentation, but do be careful. As a dungeon master, you have great power, and with great power comes great responsibility. Use it wisely. Quote David Zeb Cook, 1989. And you'll find in a lot of the older GM guys some version thereof of that original quote by Gary Gygax, that the whole point, heart and parcel of the system is to give you a set of guidelines. The rules are rules only in the word only. I mean, they're not the law, right? They're not, and I guess when I use the term mechanical rules, if you're working on your car, there's certain givens that you can't go against. That a certain size fits a certain hole. That the threads turn a certain way. This is base engineering. This is a mechanical rule that cannot be ignored unless you go to some great extreme to make it so. If all bolts turn counterclockwise to tighten, or to loosen, lefty loosey, righty tighty. If you try to reverse that, create the tool that allows you to reverse thread something, or to purchase a tool that lets you reverse thread something, and you go out of your way to reverse thread half the stuff in your motor of your car, and the next person comes along and tries to work on it, ends up stripping all those bolts out, breaking stuff off, and making a more expensive repair than what you planned on. You get what you paid for, right? So that just says, is what it is what it ain't. Now, like I said, I was talking about components, and second edition really, and I know it got more. 3.5 and 3.0 really took a step up, and we have the magic compendiums and stuff like that. And I looked through a couple of mine, and they don't go into great depth on this subject, and that's one of the reasons it's one of those optional rules. It even says it right here. Optional rules in parentheses. Your character's cast a spell. Assume that he is doing something to activate that spell. He may utter a few words, wave his hand around a couple times, wiggle his toes, swallow a live spider, etc. But under the standard rules, you don't have to know exactly what he does to activate the spell. Some of this can be answered if your DM uses the rules for spell components. The action required to cast a spell are divided into 3 groups, blah, blah. We all know how that works. If you do any kind of study on magic users, if you played them, you know the basic concepts there. And it goes on about 3 different types of aspects of spell components and so on and so forth. But there's not a lot of information on the topic of spell components themselves. And in later versions, and some of these splat books or added on source books, we've got our share of, because the backhand wants to be in on it. And we have plenty of these lists of possible component materials and uses for them. And in some of the spells, I think most of the spells, if you look in the player's handbook, they list a suggested type of component to utilize. And of course, we're back to I don't have time to go chasing spiders all over the place so I can have a collection of them. Well, one of those magic shops, the bulk of any given magic shop in any fantasy setting, if you're going to have them, should be the purchase and selling of magic components in bulk, right? That's kind of what these merchants do. It makes me think of some of those herb merchants and the old way back in the old Chinese, old black and white or early movies from China, and you go into the herb, or Japan, and you go into the apothecary, and there are walls and walls of everything you can imagine. Today, in more modern times, if you were in the States, you'd went into some sort of naturalist store, or one of those voodoo looking-ish places where you got bundles of things hanging from the ceilings, and roots of this, and jars and this and stuff, and a bunch of eyeballs looking at you out of another jar instead of pickled eggs. That's the kind of shop that I envision as a magic shop when I portray them. And then amongst that stuff, you will find the odds and ends. Now, the other side of the equation would be going into the Harry Potter's wand shop, for example, and what do we find? We walk into a shop that's got tens of thousands of wands made out of all kinds of different material by different people over time, and the person selling them is trying to match the individual wizard or wizardess to a specific type of wand. And of course, in their case, the wand is a traditional it's just an extension of their ability to project magic. The individual wand itself has no specific purpose. I mean, in the aspect that it's not a wand of magic, fireballs, and then a different wand for lightning bolts, and a different wand for feather fall. No, it is a talisman or an extension, and something that's going to get the cat there. Yeah, and there goes. The cat always wins. Hey, that's my hand. And there you go, from the Fat Man, and the fat cat here, right here, right here, back in. Right there. Yeah. That's my take on that. Game on.